All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Paketo Working Group weekly meeting. Thank you for joining. And well, let me share my screen real quick. Just in strange case you don't have the agenda link handy, there it is again in the chat, Zoom chat. And also feel free to add yourself to attend this list. Okay. Well, who would like to take notes for today's session?
I can do that, David. This is Josh.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, thank you, Josh. Awesome. Okay, new faces. We have Jericho again. Welcome back.
Hello.
Awesome. Thank you for joining. All right, I think we can move to the next item right away. Review outstanding proposals, outstanding RFCs. First one is the new features checklist, which has some recent comments or questions, I believe. Yep. Recent conversation. So wondering if there's any further discussion, any update you'd like to share about this proposal?
I left this one comment here. I know this is a simple thing and I feel like I'm making it drag out longer than it needs to. But to me, seeing it written down still leaves a lot of open questions. Like, you know, if we're getting a feature PR'd from an external contributor, like to what extent do we expect them to help us update docs and samples, stuff like that. And I think these are mostly things that I don't even know if we have a strict policy for, or we figure out on the fly sort of as we're doing it. But seeing what's written out here, I feel like I still have, you know, it raises some of the same questions from this original comment. I don't know how other folks feel.
I agree. I think part of the reason this seemingly simple RFC is like kind of hard to reason about is because it feels like a document of a sort of working agreement that doesn't exist yet. So perhaps like paths forward could be RFCs that kind of lay out more of this process, or like, you know, lay out working agreements between maintainers, like the core team and other collaborators. And then once that exists, it would probably be much easier to create such a checklist.
Okay, great. Any other comment about this RFC? All right. Thank you. So next one, proposal to add open telemetry support for Java. The author, Thomas, I don't see him here. He already added the updates to the document itself, and is working on the implementation in a branch reference there. So your feedback is more than welcome. And
I think
thank you
this one
again.
has the approvals needed to merge now. That we have a way to provide the secret credentials via binding.
Yeah, looks like it could be moved to accepted, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, thank you. Next up, the RFC to publish images to ECR. Is there any update from last week?
I think this is still blocked on me. I said I would reach out to the AWS folks and try and get them involved in this conversation. I haven't done that yet, so I will do that. And then we can come back to the conversation we were having last week about how we measure success.
Okay.
Emily, quick question. When you say the AWS folks, is that someone at VMware or someone at AWS itself, or users of AWS?
The folks who work on AWS App Runner at Amazon. So we had sort of like kicked off a conversation with them because we noticed that on their roadmap for App Runner, people had been requesting Buildpack support rather than in addition to the sort of App Runner's native integration for different languages. So we've been in touch with them since, and that was part of the reason for kicking off this effort. Like, I think distributing these images on the big crowd provider is beneficial in general, but probably the reason thinking about it now versus any other point in the future is because the AWS folks thought that it would go a long way towards making like the Buildpack experience fast and native in AWS such that they would be excited about adding Buildpack support to their platform.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Next up, the web servers re-architecture proposal. There are some recent comments here. Well, maybe questions here.
Yeah, I finally got the chance to read through this. I just think some of this stuff, I'm not sort of like implying that there's not like hidden concern. I just think a little bit more elaboration would be helpful sort of in the future. So we know, like, I think when we talk about how modular to make build packs, it could be helpful to be concrete because you could go, like the right answer is always going to be somewhere in the middle. If we break them up into infinitely tiny pieces, that's probably not as useful as right-sized chunks, but we also don't want monoliths. So I think just sort of elaborating more about like why these seams and how we think it could lead to different composition opportunities would be like a nice thing to see written in the proposal.
Sounds good. I just saw these a little while ago, and so I'll hopefully have these addressed by next week.
Thanks, Forrest.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, next one, proposal to include leaves to tiny that are needed for nodes. So wondering if there is an update or additional discussion on this matter. Seems like it's something between enabling users to maintain their own stacks or maintaining more stacks and the burden that could be associated with that. But is there anything else you would like to add to this discussion, to this proposal?
I think it's a tough one because there's a real trade-off here with a good argument on either side. Like node users would like to be able to have a smaller stack for the same reasons everyone wants a smaller stack. But in order to enable it in our current workflow, we make that really small stack a little bit bigger for everyone else. And I've definitely seen sort of comparisons of image sizes as being one of the main ways people are like evaluating different Buildpack ecosystems or the, validity of different tools. So I think just making all of our images slightly bigger across the board has some real downsides. It makes me wonder whether we want to think about what our long-term plan is here more before we decide to go ahead with this one change.
I'm also really interested in that community stacks idea that's been floated a few times and I think also mentioned here. I've been pondering it a little bit, but I don't really have a good solution. But totally agree with what you just said, Emily. It's just a really hard question. And until we have more of an idea of what community supported stack would mean, or would actually, like, what the benefits would be, I really don't know how we proceed in this specific RFC.
Sounds like maybe the right thing to do for now is sort of like to clearly communicate with the author that maybe we're not ready to approve it yet while we discuss other options.
Got it.
Sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah, please, Frankie.
Sorry, I said that sounds about right. Like, that makes sense to me as well.
All right. Thank you. Well, next up, adds grid full stack upgrade proposal. It has some approvals already. Is there any further discussion for this one? Any update about this proposal?
I think this one's ready to be merged. I think it just was like, it hadn't been around long enough that I felt like folks had seen it and knew what their kind of ask was for it. But it's been up for a week now, so probably, and it's got all the approvals we need. So I think we probably can go ahead and merge it at this point.
Okay. Thank you. And well, next up, this one I believe is just to update links for dependency management proposals, right?
Yep, that's right.
Got it. Thanks. Cool. Anything else in terms of RFC's proposals? No. Okay, so next section, CMV updates and or questions. Well, there's one that most of us saw, the enlightening episode. This is stream hosted by Whitney Lee, this time with Natalie Arellano, describing the why behind Buildpacks and going through how it works. I find it really educational with a deeply visual format, so very recommended as a resource for anyone who would like to get started with Buildpacks in general and Paketo Buildpacks in particular. And thank you, Frankie, so that you joined the episode and helped with comments and questions. Thank you. Cool. Any other upstream update that you're aware of that you like to share here? Okay. Next up, project update. Go Buildpack 2.10 release and support for completely reproducible builds. That's great. Any comment about this release?
Previously, obviously, like rebuilds between two versions or like rebuilds of the same app would be reproducible. This now ensures, after some work with the formats of the software bill of materials, that given the same inputs and the same decisions made by the build packs, you should end up with a 100% identical build image. You know, like the SHA should be 100% reproducible given the same inputs to the build pack. So yeah, we just did a little bit of work to ensure that that's the case.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Forrest. Great. Any other update from the last 7 days you would like to share here? No. All right. Next section, open discussion topics. I would like to point out to the great work Jericho is doing around, proposing support to install from source on any stack. Thank you, Rob, who provided a good amount of feedback already. So wondering if anyone from you would like to continue a conversation here, because the ideas from Jericho, I think, will trigger some architectural conversations, bigger conversations right now. So I don't know if Jericho would like to comment something about this work.
Sure. I mean, yeah, thank you for reviewing so far and all the input. That's really great. Very helpful. Yeah, and I guess I actually plan to do similar modifications to other build packs because you guys have done great work in creating the build packs, and I really don't want to rewrite them just to support another stack. So I think that the conversations about how you deal with stacks going forward really kind of play into what I'm doing. And if I can help support that work and also kind of like help meet the goals I'm trying to meet for my, my own work, that would line up really nicely. So I'm kind of all ears, and it would be great to have some direction on how I should be doing things going forward so that, we could be working together.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, like I said in my Slack message, I haven't had a chance to dig into this too much so far. I think it should work. You've tested it. Pragmatically, as we've mentioned, we're in the middle of like rewriting sort of how we do dependencies. So at the moment, like if you were to make this PR, it would just get like clobbered instantly. So like we need to like sort that out first. But like more sort of like architecturally or philosophically, like I think the only path we have to solve this kind of problem is the one that you've proposed, right? Which is sort of match on stacks and switch which path we go, either install dynamically or install based on existing dependencies. I would love to see support for the RFC that was merged upstream in the CMB project for supporting a more nuanced like concept than just a stack ID, because I think when that exists, this becomes a lot simpler, right? Because you can match on like distro name and like architecture, and then you don't need to like, it's going to be a lot more straightforward for us to just say like, yeah, the build pack supports anything that meets these like stack constraints. At the moment, we can basically only say like this stack ID or wildcard. And like, that doesn't really encapsulate the nuance that you're looking to solve for, right? You want a stack that isn't the Ubuntu Jammy stack, but also isn't really wildcard either. We don't really have a good solution for that today.
Yeah, and I should say that the reason I did wildcard is when I was trying to write my own Python build pack, they were all doing the same thing. They're all doing configure and make and install. And I was like, well, as long as you're on Linux, it's going to be the same. So yeah, that's why I went with that whole star stack approach.
And to be clear, I think that's the right approach given the constraints we have today. I don't think it makes sense for every build pack to have an exhaustive list of known stack IDs, especially ones that aren't approved in the upstream CMB. Like that's not going to scale. So at the moment, it's either like the approved stack ID of like Jammy and Bionic or whatever, or it's star stack or wildcard. And like hopefully in the future we'll be able to like express this in a more like sort of analytical way, right? We can say like we support all stacks that meet this set of constraints, which would be like architecture and operating system.
Yeah.
But like I said, that requires the RFC has been approved upstream, but I don't think it exists in the life cycle. I don't think there's anything we can do about it yet.
I feel like the implementation of that has sort of been delayed because of folks being on vacation, stuff like that. So it's not happening as fast as we might have wanted. I do wonder if we could do something here without relying on the C and B concepts. Like the life cycle should pass some of this information that you're talking about, Rob, as environment variables, but even if it isn't, especially if our fallback is something that kind of works everywhere, where we just build from source, we could look for something like etc os release file, which should have most of that information. Like I think it even says in the RFC that a lot of the stuff that needs to be passed as environment variables, needs to match what would be in that file anyways. At least for like OS distro and version, stuff like that. So I wonder if, some of these constraints are things we could find out from the system and match on to decide to use a dependency without sort of using CMB concepts. It's just what we could discover from running in the context of the image.
Yeah, that seems like a good path to explore. I'm not super familiar with what exists. It does kind of sound like, from what you're saying, that it's still assuming like a Linux environment, and if we put a star stack in it, I don't think there's anything in that the lifecycle can do to say that if you, for example, if you run on a Windows stack, right, the lifecycle isn't going to know that the build pack shouldn't run, and it's just going to fail during build, which is like not the optimal user experience, but maybe it's the best we can do today.
Yeah, I mean, I could add some logic that checks that if it's a Linux type system, like you said, look at some files, see if there's like an etc folder or whatever, and then just spit out a message that says, I don't think this is going to work on Windows.
I think my point is that that's already like later than I would like, because I would like this problem to be solved outside of the build pack, right? We can solve it in the build pack, that's easy. Like, I just don't think it's a great user experience to get halfway through like a detect or even a build phase and then have some like not particularly helpful user error coming from the build pack. When I think like the primitives should exist in the lifecycle to be able to say like this build pack won't work on this stack, and we have that primitive, but we can't express the stack sufficiently to be able to like leverage that lifecycle capability.
Gotcha. Yeah,
100% agree.
Yeah, and I haven't spent enough time looking at how the life cycle works. Mostly looked at the build packs to try to, meet my needs, if you will. But I do think that this is a nice kind of like way to transition towards whatever the future is. Even if it's not the most ideal situation, I think most people are going to be using your stack anyway. And so that like this is going to support that and not change the experience for anybody. It's just going to be for those people living on the edge. They they should know what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah, and to be clear, like I think that just to emphasize, like I really like the idea of being able to compile from source in the fallback case, right? Like if you are like running on some stack that that the Paketo team hasn't tested against and validated and shipped to precompiled dependency, then like building from source is a great option. I would just love to be able to say like even more constrained, like, either we don't support Windows and the lifecycle knows that, or any other stack that exists that isn't Linux, or maybe we do actually just add Windows support, but the Paketo team can't really test that, so I'm a bit nervous about introducing that too. And the other thing I was going to say is, and I haven't fully formed this thought, but I'll just kind of share it anyway. It'd be really interesting to sort of see like how this works, because it's something that we've talked about as a Python maintainers and sort of like dependency folks as well. It's like, can we get away from pre-compiling things, right? Like maybe we actually want to go down this path for all stacks. I don't know yet, but it'd be, once we have this in place, it'll be really easy and interesting to kind of swap them out and explore what that looks like. Like, I don't know how long it takes for you to compile Python from scratch in a stack. If it's quick enough, maybe that's the trade-off worth making, right? Maybe we don't need to pre-compile it at all. I'm not sure yet.
I really haven't looked into this much yet, but I also wonder how this idea ties in with that alternative dependency packaging proposal that Dan Mafusa had put together. We discussed it a few weeks ago, and I can send it along in the thread that you started in Slack. But I just wonder how this would also play with that idea.
Yeah, and I when I started looking into this, I was like expecting that I would have to build a dependency server similar to what you guys did, and then I just decided I didn't want to do that, and I would accept the 5-minute compile time on every build just because it was easier. But are you guys trying to move away from the dependency server in general? Yeah. So okay, so this is in line with those kinds of goals too. So that's helpful.
Yeah, just to provide a tiny bit of color to that, we want to get away from the dependency server as a like standalone server of metadata. We probably, at least in the first phase, we will probably continue pre-compiling assets, but we'll be doing it somewhere else. Like it'll be more visible. It'll be part of like GitHub workflows. We may want to in the future explore if we can not pre-compile assets, like do what you do to compile it from source. But also you just kind of raised the question for me, which is like, you said you'll take the hit of compiling Python every time, which sounds like you're not using caching. But you should be able to leverage caching as well for this.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but just a little background. So like when we build containers, we have this like Docker and Docker self-contained little pod that gets spun up. So like you're not getting caching every time, but it's fine because that also means you're not having containers conflict with each other and all that, overwriting each other. So yeah, but you're right. Like locally, you're right. I am getting the caching benefit, and that is nice. Only 5 minutes the first time.
Just at least with Pack CLI, if that's what you're using under the hood, you can use an image and a registry as a cache rather than a volume. So you might be able to like persist your cache across builds.
I did not know that. I'm gonna have to take a note on that and more learning.
It's slower than a volume in general, but it works in a larger variety of situations. So it can be useful.
Cool. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. Let me ask a question before I forget. I haven't done anything with testing, but I'm assuming that the tests are just go find where the tests are and then just add a test case for this as best I can.
Sure. Our general philosophy is to integration test like the end-to-end happy paths and to use like unit testing to drive out like error cases and kind of all of the extra sort of like functionality that you don't necessarily need to prove something works. So I would probably at a high level expect to see like an integration test testing this path, which actually might be very hard because you don't necessarily have a stack to test against. We'll have to think about that one. But in principle, yeah, I think this would definitely be worth having integration test and then some additional unit tests. And you can probably just look at the existing patterns. In general, integration tests live under the integration directory, unit tests live alongside the code they're testing.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll take a look. Thank you.
Awesome. Great discussion. Thank you all. All right. Anything else you would like to share or discuss here?
So I actually have one quick question for Jericho. Just riffing off what I just said about having a stack for testing, is your stack like going to be publicly available? I saw the repo, but I wasn't sure like what your long-term intentions are.
Yep, no, that's just there for anybody to use. I don't plan to take it down. And if you guys, I haven't done GitHub Actions yet. That's one of the things on my list, but I've got a lot of tabs open. It's hard to get them all closed. But yeah, that's just going to be available. So if you want to use it for testing, we can use it for integration testing. And then in the future, if you decide to copy that and do it, or however you want to do it, it's fine. But it was just an example so that we have something to work from, because I was doing it locally and then I just decided that's not going to help you see what I'm doing, what I'm trying to accomplish. So yeah. And thanks for all the feedback and input. This is really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Jericho. It's awesome to see your contributions. All right. Anything else discuss to share here? No. Okay. Thank you all for joining. Hope to see you next week. Goodbye.
See you.